A quick little message to the writers of the world. Don't be afraid. When you put your work out there for feedback, for consideration, for other people to consume, it's scary. I know that it's scary, but everyone will always have an opinion. And the only opinion that matters is your opinion and the opinion of the producer who's going to say yes to your project. All the rest is noise. Don't worry about the haters. Don't worry about those who criticize easily but won't step up to the plate themselves. Those people don't deserve your respect. The respect has to go to the person who follows through, and that's you. Hello there, my screenwriting friends, and welcome to another episode of The Feedback Loop. This is the free weekly deep dive screenwriting feedback series where we look at the first 3 pages of a different writer's script each week. We do a deep dive. We go through them word by word, page by page. We try to identify what's working, what's maybe not working. If something's not working, we have the writer on the call. We discuss their intentions with them, and we hopefully give them some tips and strategies and techniques for maybe making their work land a little bit more effectively with their intended reader. I hope that you're not just joining me now, but if you are, welcome. Sorry for the really quick abbreviated thing. Everybody else who's been watching this for a while is kind of bored with that setup already. So if you don't know who I am, you haven't watched my YouTube channel, you haven't watched my TED Talk, you haven't done my system, you haven't done anything. My name is Jeff Ballo, and I spent nearly 20 years as an independent producer looking for material to produce. When I couldn't find anything, I started teaching screenwriting from the producer's perspective, trying to help writers take what ultimately amounted to really good ideas and help them turn those into screenplays. But not just screenplays, because really anyone can teach someone how to write a screenplay, but to teach them how to write screenplays that producers can actually say yes to. That's actually the hard part. Everybody out there teaching how to write a screenplay, but how do you write a screenplay that a producer can say yes to? The challenge that we have with so much of what's out there is that people don't know, people don't understand, and that's kind of what this series is trying to be all about. Trying to give you some insight into the producer's mindset, what we're thinking when we're reading the project submission. If you're struggling as a screenwriter, hopefully maybe give you some idea on maybe why the work isn't quite connecting, or you get close but you just can't make it happen. This will hopefully give you some insight and help you understand why. Maybe we can overcome the problems that you're having and get you to the finish line and the success. And we can start seeing the ideas that you have in your head turned into actual movies. Sound good? To that end, today we are going to look at some pages that come to us from a writer in Scotland by the name of CJ Hodgman. He's been calling himself Kieran, so I'm going to refer to him as Kieran, but he goes by CJ. His script title is Never to Return, and he calls it a drama. Kieran is on the call with us, so we can have an interesting and hopefully lively discussion if there's anything that needs to be discussed along the way. I think there's a lot of really good stuff in this particular session, so I hope you will enjoy this. When we're finished talking to Kieran, then we go and look at the first 3 pages of a familiar story, a famous movie, a famous script, something that was box office successful, maybe something that came out around the time that we did the session. In this case, we're going to look at the first 3 pages from the Oscar-nominated screenplay for American Sniper. Now, one of the great things about this movie is that it's a lesson in how to start with tension immediately. It immediately creates a tense and compelling scenario that just pulls the reader right in. And there are some actual screenwriting techniques and ideas that help achieve that end. So it's a really great couple of pages to have a look at. So I hope you enjoy those. Remember, this is a deep dive, which means we go down the rabbit hole. This is not some surface level feedback where we just blithely look at, oh, well, you need to change your formatting. We don't do any of that stuff here. The formatting is Important, absolutely, for reasons we've discussed, but it's not the most important thing. The most important thing is the story you're telling and how you're telling it, and making sure that you're putting your story in the reader's mind in a way that they're going to feel and experience and understand and get. So, because it's a deep dive, you might want to grab a snack, you might want to sit on something comfortable, you might want to take some notes, but what you definitely want to do, I hope, is enjoy this episode of The Feedback Loop. Let's get started. Fade in, exterior Warsaw, Parkland area, morning. Jacob, 28, looks old in the eyes for a man of his age. The way he jogs and punches the cold, fresh air in front of him shows he trains regularly. He breathes rapidly, but still maintains a high intensity. He sees something or someone in the distance that slows him to a saunter. By the exit gate of the park stand a gang of men with Doberman, a cocky bunch who think they run things. Jacob knows them and they know him. One in particular, Jersey, 29, has a very badly bruised black eye. They all stare at Jacob as he gets closer. The Doberman barks and growls. Jersey has the leash and deliberately loosens his grip slightly as the Doberman begins to bark and growl more. But Jacob shows no fear. He gives them a smile. He picks up the pace again, and the smirk does not leave his face as he jogs past them out of the park. Exterior Warsaw, housing estate, high-rise flats, day. Jacob reaches the long concrete footpath that leads to the secure entrance of the buildings, which are communist era, gray and run down, litter and graffiti the only color. The residents that enter and leave are elderly couples, poor single mothers with prams, and teenagers in football tops. There is one gang of young boys who hang about outside the entrance, teens who have no purpose or ambition in life but to intimidate their elders. As Jacob jogs, he weaves in between elderly folk as if they are obstacles in his training regime. Martin, 13, the leader of the boys, shifts where he stands among his friends to avoid being seen by Jacob. As Jacob sprints and slows, he sees Martin in the corner of his eye. It stops him dead from his run. He shouts over to him in Polish. Jacob, why haven't you been at training? Martin, I've been busy. Jacob gets right in Martin's face. The other boys try their best to act tough as they surround Jacob. Jacob, busy, but time for these losers. Jacob starts to rough Martin up. Pinch, push, punch. It is difficult to know if it is a play fight or a fight for real. Jacob continued. You selling? Jacob moves closer up to Martin's face, but the boy remains defiant. Martin, get out of here. It's none of your business. Ed, 13, is right beside Martin and tries to headbutt Jacob. He is too obvious. Jacob easily dodges him and counter-pushes him away. Ed, don't try and kiss my friend. They giggle at Jacob's expense. Ed continued, oh wait, I thought you were just like your brother. This makes the boys laugh even more at Jacob, but he maintains his focus on Martin. Jacob, waste your time if you want, or train with me to become a man. Ed, you mean like those men you're whack? Jacob hooks Ed. He's out cold before he hits the ground. Those within earshot ignore it. A few of the boys attend to Ed on the ground. A little blood is on the concrete now from the back of his head. His face has already started to slightly swell. Martin, what is wrong with you? Jacob crouches down over Ed, slaps and shakes him. Ed starts to wake in a daze. Jacob, see, he's fine. Interior Rajnich residence hall, minutes later. Jacob peers his head around the front door to see if anyone is there. He calls out in Polish. Jacob, hello? With no reply, Jacob begins to take off his sweaty clothes. Tomas, 14, with glasses and super curly, thick black hair, enters the hall from another room. The boy is simple but good-natured. Jacob continued, you not hear me? Tomas, I'm helping your mum prepare supper. Jacob continues to undress and throw some of his dirty clothes at Tomas, who smiles and throws them back at Jacob. Jacob stares at Tomas's top lip that has the beginnings of a very poor mustache. Jacob licks his finger, smears Tomas's face. Jacob, what is that shit? Tomas is disgusted as he rubs his face to dry the spit. Papa, 60s, the breadwinner but not the head of the family, enters the hall with a dinner plate in his hand. Both stop their play fight. Jacob holds Tomas's face. Jacob, looks like Big Zbigniew Boniek, no? Jacob beams a large smile and shakes Tomas's face from side to side. Then let's go. Jacob wants to dummy fight, but Tomas walks toward Papa as he rubs his neck. Papa, why are you so rough? Jacob gathers his clothes from the floor, starts to head for his bedroom door. Papa continued whispers. Dara is here. Jacob puts his finger over his lips and then points to the door that Tomas and Papa walked in from. Papa shakes his head and then points at the door Jacob was about to open. Jacob whispers back, "I'll have her gone by supper." Interior Jacob's room, continuous action. Jacob lays his sweat-stained clothes on his bed. So these are the pages that we're going to talk about today. My first initial thoughts are, one of the things that I liked about these pages is that they do sort of establish this kind of rough and sparse environment, this sort of world where where there's lots of surly people in a kind of rough and tumble place. We very quickly get into, people who are cocky, think they run things, one with a black eye, a Doberman barking. And then we get into this group of kids, and then immediately we get into this sort of violent confrontation between the main character, who's probably looking out for one of them, but in a very rough and tumble sort of way. So it's establishing a nice milieu, I guess, a nice sort of environment, and clearly it's setting up something. But I think initially it's not really clear why we would like Jacob, and it's not really clear what might be going on. So one of the initial challenges we have is sort of what's going on and why does it matter. I feel overall like it's a little bit over-described, like there's too much. We could probably cut the description in half and get the same or more across, but we also need something maybe a little stronger to pull us in, because if you're a producer or if you're a reader and you have 200 scripts awaiting your attention, I'm not sure that this grabs you enough at the beginning. And if the initial logline or synopsis or whatever it was that compelled you to read it in the first place wasn't strong enough or didn't grab you enough, I think the overall feeling would be that I'm not quite sure that there's going to be something here, or if there is, it might be sort of buried within kind of an over-described situation. So what I want to do is take that conversation and open it up to Kieran. Before we do, though, the overall, I think it's written in a clear and interesting way. So some of the things that we have talked about in previous episodes are not really issues here. The issue becomes more of just not being streamlined enough and going straight to the heart of the drama initially. So that's my initial sort of reaction. Let's get Kieran on the line and we'll see what it feels like, see what he thinks about my read of it. Kieran, are you there?
Hello.
Hello. There you are.
Good.
How are you?
I'm very good, sir. Thank you.
How did it feel to have somebody else reading your words, and did it make you notice anything that you might not have noticed otherwise?
Well, it was interesting for sure. I do get your point that maybe there's stuff buried within the description that a few pages after will maybe become clearer. Certainly having it read out loud, I do think that it does make sense, which I'm happy about. That it's clear, that it's not kind of jumbled up. But certainly your point about Jacob is not a character to like. It's certainly true, but that is very deliberate though. So I'm glad that you kind of think that. But obviously, within the first 3 pages, it's not really clear what the plot is going to be. But there are little, hopefully, crumbs of details that you can maybe kind of pick up upon. But it's interesting.
Well, so let me ask you this: what's going to be the main driving plot of the story here?
So basically, Jacob's brother is being killed in Scotland, and Jacob has to go and identify the body and bring the body back. But what you see in the first 3 pages there is that Jakob is someone who is particularly violent, quite aggressive. What you see with the guys in the park with the black eye, that the guy Yertze, he's important to the plot. Because he's related to Jakob in terms of how they don't get on, and his opinions about Jakob's brother is what's led to them fighting. And what basically Jakob's situation is that he's on bail for attempted murder, but it's the attempted murder of Yertze. So that's the kind of context in which Jakob has to travel to Scotland, and he's given a kind of special dispensation to go and identify the body and bring it back. But obviously, matters are complicated by the fact that of who he is as a person, and the fact that he doesn't get on with his brother because his brother was gay. So I'm trying to build up this kind of really working class, poor environment that Jakob and his brother Raf have grown up in, so that when he goes on that journey to Scotland to go and identify his brother's body, you see the juxtaposition between what's a very working class, kind of homophobic neighbourhood to the world that his brother lives in. But obviously, because Jakob is from this area, it is obviously kind of determined his thoughts, and basically how he treats his brother. Because it's how he's treated his brother is what's forced his brother away. And it's called Never to Return because it's not obviously just about the brother will never return because the brother's been killed. But what you start to learn is that basically there's no way that Jakob will ever return because of who he is as a person. Like his faults as a person mean that he can't just go to Scotland, identify the body, stay out of trouble and come back. He is a deeply violent kind of troubled person, basically.
Okay, so you're telling me a lot of things that I'm going to find out that are character-based and interpersonal drama-based, and that all sounds fine. The challenge is that you still need to initially draw us into the story. You still need to have some hook that pulls us in, that gets us to say, I want to know who this person is. I want to follow this story. We need something that engages us to a point until we care enough about them that even if we see that he's not necessarily a likable guy at the beginning, we still care about him and we still want to follow his story in some way. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And one of the challenges is if we strip it all back to its basics, what we have here in this opening scene is a guy going out for an exercise jog, jogging past some guys who leer at him with their dog. One of them has a black eye. He keeps going. That's all the first scene is, right?
Yeah.
The second scene is he's going into presumably where he lives, which is this, housing estate, basically. Yeah. There's a bunch of young guys hanging out. He sees one, recognizes one, asks him what he's doing there, basically with them. Pops the other guy who starts mouthing off at him.
Yeah.
And bang, then we're into the inside where he's sort of coming home and getting changed, and somebody's here in that room, right?
Yeah.
Okay, not necessarily a problem, but dramatically, narratively, it's not really engaging, right? There's no sort of there's not really a hook in there. What you're doing is you're kind of painting this picture of this world and this space and the people that are in it, and you're giving us little clues that are going to become relevant later. But we're probably not going to remember all these little clues that you're putting in here because we don't have a connection to these people, right? Yeah. So imagine, for example, this is not an example you're going to want to incorporate in your story, but just to give you some sort of idea of what I'm trying to say. So you introduce this guy who has a badly bruised black eye. Okay, now you tell me that he's he's the guy that Jakob is going to be accused of murdering him later?
Trying to kill him, yeah.
Of attempted murder.
Yeah, yeah.
So if you had some sort of confrontation with them initially, where through the confrontation the black eye is some sort of a shock kind of thing, like a moment that we go, whoa, right? Then we'll remember that detail later, right? If we're introducing the relationship between these characters and then we notice that, then we'll remember this detail. But if it's just sort of like he's jogging past it, there's not really anything going on yet. This is like what it is right now is like you're describing the curtains. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like you're describing the tree. It's like it's a detail. It comes across to the reader as a detail. Yeah. It comes across to the reader as something to paint the picture. And the reason for that is because of how a lot of the writing is unfolding. So let's go through this like a little bit more specifically. So we'll just go through this word by word, okay? So starting off with here, exterior Warsaw, Parkland area, morning. So first of all, we want to go. Warsaw is not a location. Warsaw is a city, right? So whenever you go, whatever your location is going to be is going to come first. So exterior park area, right? Or parkland, park, just exterior park. And then you can go in parentheses and brackets, Warsaw, okay, right? And then you say morning. Does that make sense? Yes. So the reason for that is because the location always has to interior, exterior, and then whatever the location is. And I see this all the time where it's like exterior Los Angeles. It's like, well, Los Angeles is a whole city. Like, where are we in Los Angeles? So you put the brackets around that. So when we get down to here, you have exterior Warsaw housing estates. So this would probably be exterior high-rise housing flats.
Yes.
Right? And then you could say Warsaw also if that's important and relevant to the story. Mm-hmm. But in that way, we have a better picture of sort of where we are. Now, you start off with Jakob. Sorry, I was pronouncing it Jacob. Jakob, 28, looks old in the eyes for a man of his age. The very first thing you put in your script, the very first line you put in your script is a description of someone that I fundamentally cannot see. Because these are words on a page. I don't have the benefit of the actor's face. So I'm never going to picture this guy unless you paint a picture of him for me, right? You use some sort of metaphor or some sort of really clever phrase or something that just really puts a picture in my head, right? Like something analogous or something, right? So, but when you say Jakob 28 looks old in the eyes for a man of his age, that's very, very nondescript to me. Like there's no way for me to picture this guy, right? Okay. And because you're doing it in the very first line, my initial reaction is you're focused on detail. You're not focused on story.
Okay.
So as the reader, I immediately go on the back foot a little bit. And I go, okay, this is probably going to be over-described. Do you see what I mean?
Okay. Yeah.
So, as the reader, we're always looking for what is this story about? What's happening? Who are these people? Where am I? And why do I care? Right? Yeah. So, like so far, like right off the very bat, where you've given me no indication of any of those things. The only unique thing that I see is Warsaw, right? Okay, fair enough. We'll leave it at that. We'll keep going. The way he jogs. Oh, he's jogging, right? So you're already like leaping ahead. You're describing things that you see clearly, but you're not presenting them for me so that I'm going to see them clearly. Do you see what I mean? Yeah. Okay, that's fine. I'll still get up to speed. And he punches the cold, fresh air in front of him. The way he jogs and punches the cold, fresh air in front of him shows he trains regularly. I get what you're trying to do. There's the old adage, show don't tell, and you're kind of showing us, right?
Right. Okay.
So it's like We don't, I don't know. Do we need, like, is that the most important thing we need to see first, right? If it's just a guy jogging through the park, it's a guy, he's having his Rocky moment or whatever it is. Fine.
Well, I'm trying to get across that he's very fit, because it becomes important later on because he's a boxer. So maybe I need to show that he's a boxer in a different way. Does that make sense?
What's most important is what is happening. Like, what are we watching, right? So the way you're wording these things, you're wording it back to front, right? So you're describing someone and then letting the description mean something. So you're kind of like trying to reveal the thing that you really should probably just be saying, because that's the nugget we need. So in other words, I'm not sure how many of these you've watched or attended, but I always talk about this idea of image order, right? And the idea is that the order in which you present images changes the way the reader understands what's being said. So if you keep the important piece of information till the very end, then we have confusion, then, it makes sense. Yes, there is that moment of, cool reveal. But there may also be, wait, what am I reading? Oh, okay. And it just disconnects the writer from the reader a little bit. And makes it harder to get. We don't want this much clever writing, I guess, in screenwriting. We want it to be very utilitarian, very sparse, your writing is fine, it's solid, but it's too much. You know what I mean? Like because every little word you write, I'm thinking, is this relevant to the story? Does this help me understand what's going on here? So if I get through 2 or 3 paragraphs and I have a picture, but I don't know why the details are relevant, then I'm going to assume that I can skip over details from here on. Do you see what I mean? So we really have to watch that, particularly in screenwriting. You really have to watch that to make sure that everything is pushing the narrative forward. And as yet, at this point, this first paragraph, we don't have a narrative yet, right? So let's see. He breathes rapidly, but still maintains a high intensity. Is that important? I don't know why, if it is, right? So I've thought about that. Like, no, I mean, I'm still trying to figure out what's going on. Okay, he's jogging, basically, right? Or he's training through the park. What that looks like could be changed as far as I can tell, unless jogging and punching in the air is those physical motions are going to come into play narratively later in the story. Do you see what I mean? It's like if you imagine describing a room and then you imagine describing the curtains, the only time you would ever describe the curtains is if the curtains themselves factor into the plot later on, right? Otherwise, you're never going to talk about the curtains. So same thing applies when somebody's training or breathing rapidly, or you know what I mean? You can say he's intensely training in the park. Done. Anyway, so he sees something or someone in the distance that slows him to a saunter. I like this. It's too many words, but I love this idea of like seeing something and then we see him slow down. Fine. There's a way to condense that. I'm going to leave that to you to condense that. But by the exit gate of the park stand a gang of men with a Doberman. This is like I don't know why, but screenwriters love this kind of a sentence where you're like, paint the picture here and then reveal the thing that's in front of the thing, right? So by the exit of the park stand a gang of men with a Doberman. It's the image order is out of place, right? Like, I want to see the Doberman first. There's a gang of men behind it, and they're blocking the gate, or whatever it might be, right? So it's going to be. You always want to think about your story as being on some level. There's a character. The character has some sort of a goal, and then something gets in the way of that goal, right? So even within your scene, even within the way you describe the thing, we got to know what the goal is, what the purpose is, what the character's going toward. We got to know who the gut person is, and we got to know what's standing in their way. So We don't want to jumble that stuff around within the sentence. Otherwise, it's that moment of, wait, what's going on here now? Oh, okay. Just that little. It takes 2 seconds, but it breaks the flow for the reader, right? You say a cocky bunch who think they run things. First couple times I read this, I really didn't like the sentence because it's that sort of sentence fragment, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with sentence fragments, but the way this is worded, I'm thinking you're about to describe something else, and it just stops. So, not too worried about that, but I guess what I want in that part is what is the narrative implication of this? Do you know what I mean? Like, how is this important to see right now?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, okay, Jakob knows them and they know him. I don't have a problem with that. That's fine. One in particular, how do you pronounce it? Jerzy?
Jerzy.
Jerzy, 29, has a very badly bruised black eye. These details are fine. I don't necessarily have a problem with that. But because they're detached from any narrative implications in this moment, they're just description. And that, I guess that's the point that I'm getting at. Is it clear? Does that make sense?
No, I get, yeah. I get what you mean, I. No.
Because I don't want to say that you don't want this kind of detail. If the scene itself has more of a reason for us to see these details.
Yeah. It's basically not clear why all these details are here. Basically, is that kind of?
I mean, at the end of the day, it's clear. You're just setting things up.
Yeah.
But that's not a dramatic way to pull me into the story, right?
Yeah.
So, if you imagine, I'm kind of gonna give away what American Sniper does, but in American Sniper, we're seeing details through the guy's scope. Right,
yeah.
So we're discovering details of a scene by the action. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. He has to see what's in this scene, and so that's when you learn the various details, right? So it's not just detail for, hey, this is over here and that's over here and that's over here. Does it make sense? Like it's a part of the action that's unfolding.
Because you know what's at stake with American Sniper, because you know obviously what the job is, and you know.
Right. So that the situation has that built into it, but so for yours, because we don't really know where we are. For all we know, this could be a story about a sniper. For all we know, this could be the story of this could be a love story. I mean, you called it a drama. We really don't have any clues, and so the reader is always looking for those clues when they're reading your words. So anything that's like window dressing or description that doesn't tell us like what's the narrative, what's the story itself. Who wants what and how is what getting in their way, right? Like, that's what we're looking for first. Once we have that, you can sprinkle in some detail to fill it out, to flesh it out. But if we start with that, then it becomes very, it's hard to engage with it, is what I'm saying. So let's keep reading. They all stare at Jakob as he gets closer. The Doberman barks and growls. Jerzy has the leash and deliberately loosens his grip slightly as the Doberman begins to bark and growl more. This is a very long-winded way to say what you're like. I know the picture you're painting, but it's you could probably say all this in like one line, right? There's probably a way. Like that's my challenge to you. See if you can, because there's potentially some drama there, but then my brain's going like. Are the dogs going to attack him? Okay, no, So then he keeps going. All right, so what was that? I know you'll tell me later, and I assume you'll tell me later. But and I know from talking to you now that you have reasons for setting all these things up. But
Yeah.
I don't know that as the reader, right? I know that from talking to you, and you explain these things to me. But if it's just pages that I'm getting submitted, there's no way for me to know that. And there are so many scripts out there that do this kind of description and then never talk about any of it again. That the reader is kind of gun shy. The reader's like, okay, this person's probably never going to pick back up on this thread again. You know what I mean? So it's not necessarily your fault, but just the volume of material that readers read makes it such that we assume the worst, and we're usually right. So you want to make sure that your writing is it doesn't tap into those like weaker writing styles, if you know what I mean. But Jakob shows no fear. He gives them a smile. He picks up the pace again, and the smirk does not leave his face as he jogs past them out of the park. This is the thing that we've talked about in previous sessions as well, so I want to highlight it. The smirk does not leave his face. Screenwriting should always be active present tense, right? So it's a character or thing doing something, right? So what you've done in this sentence is you've made the smirk the active part of it, right? The smirk is doing something, which is sitting on his face, which is going to be the weakest way to get that idea across, right? So he picks up the pace again and smirks at them as he jogs past. So make it that he is smirking. The smirk is not doing something. Does that make sense?
Yes.
It becomes it's like a passive voice, or it's there's probably some English teacher out there. I'll watch this and tell me what the phrase is for it, but it's some sort of thing where you're changing point of view within the sentence, and it's just confusing for the reader, and it feels poetic to you as you're writing it and reading it back, and there is a certain poetry to it, but it's too convoluted, right? It's too much. Particularly, again, we're at the very beginning of your script, right?
Yes.
All we want to know is what's going on, who are these people, what do they want, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so exterior Warsaw housing estate. Again, we'll change that. You'd want to change that. Jakob reaches the long concrete footpath that leads to the secure entrance of the building, which are communist era, gray and run down. It's a very long run-on sentence, which, considering litter and graffiti the only color is a sentence fragment, you clearly don't mind sentence fragments. So I'm not sure why you had this long, whenever you have to the something, of the something, which are something, your sentence is too long, and you can. What you want to do is you want to break things down into images mostly, right? So if he's reaching the long concrete footpath, Jacob reaches is not. This is not a very active verb. Right? He's not doing something. I mean, technically, he's doing something. He's reaching something, which is like the end of a run. Yes. Like, think active, right? Think what's he doing, and how do I use what he's doing to paint those pictures? But long concrete footpath that leads to a secure entrance of the buildings, which are communist era, gray and run down. You don't need any of that. You can just go. He reaches a communist era run-down high-rise block of flats, right? Yeah. Done. We've got the same picture, fewer words, more clear and distinct. That's all we really need at that point. Litter and graffiti, the only color, is another one of the sentence fragments that kind of bothered me a little on first view. I don't think it's that big a problem. I don't mind it as a style. And if you're doing it, you did it earlier. So, what was it? Where was it? A cocky bunch who think they run things, and then litter and graffiti. So there's a certain staccato style in the writing, which helps the sparseness of the scene. Which I told you at the beginning. I like this kind of world, the sparse world that you're setting up. Yeah. And part of that comes from the way you've written this, even though I'm now recommending against this like way of writing it.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
So we want to hang on to the sparseness, but we
Yes.
want to make sure that there's a narrative pulling us through it. The residents that enter and leave are elderly couples, poor single mothers with prams, and teenagers in football tops. This is a inverted image order. So what you want to do is switch this around. So elderly couples, poor single mothers with prams, and teenagers in football tops come and go.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There is one gang of young boys who hang about outside at the entrance, teens who have no purpose or ambition in life but to intimidate their elders. I like the image. I really, really like this image. I feel like there's a more concise way to say that. I want you to be more concise with it, but I like the idea of it. As Jakob jogs, he weaves in between elderly folk as if they are obstacles in his training regime. I like that image. I feel like that image could almost be up front, you know? He's jogging through the park. He's jogging around people. What we always have to do, particularly for the main character of our story, is that we've got to care about him. We've got to want to like him. Or at the very least, we have to be fascinated by him enough to want to follow his story.
Yeah.
So how do you do that when it's a character that's maybe a bit violent or a bit not likable, right?
Yes. Yeah.
One of the ways you can kind of cheat that is have him do something that he's good at or that is interesting at the beginning. So we start with something that pulls us into, hey, he's fit.
He's interesting, yeah.
Yeah, and then he starts slapping around this other kid. And you're like, wait a second, right? Like that's, in some ways, I think that's going to get you where you want to go a bit faster, right?
Yes.
Martin 13, leader of these boys, shifts where this is one of those things writers love to do, which is describe the logistics. Shifts where he stands among his friends to avoid being seen by Jacob. You could just say ducks behind his friend, or you know what I mean?
Yeah.
The idea is great. I love I love the image of it, but it's awkwardly written, so it takes that extra second to click.
Basically, Martin tries to hide to avoid being seen. Basically.
No. But it took me 2 reads to understand that, and that can't happen because if I don't.
What I mean is that's how I should write it. Basically, it should be as short and as concise as that, rather than describing the actual movement.
Yes, that's true. But also, if you think about if you have too many words to describe something simple, what happens is it's very easy for the reader to miss it, and so I'll get it if I sit and read this sentence. It's not hard to figure out, right?
Yeah.
But the point is that I'm reading it fast, like I'm skimming it. I'm reading it quickly because first of all, there's 10 other scripts that need to be read, and what is this? What's going on here? Okay, so it's like I want you to hit it quickly, and if you over describe something or you describe it in just even that slightly confusing kind of way, it can pull me away from it. So my brain is on 2 different things. So I may miss something about the story that you're trying to tell, right?
Yeah.
Like it was the second read of this that this scene made sense to me. The first was like, what's going on? You know what I mean? And that's dangerous for you, the writer.
Mm-hmm.
As Jakob sprints and slows, he sees Martin in the corner of his eye. It stops him dead from his run. Here's a blocking issue. It stops him dead from his run. He shouts over to him in Polish. Why haven't you been at training? I've been busy. Jacob gets right in his face. So he shouted over to him, but like within a second, he's in his face. Like there's a logistics issue. Either if you take shouts over to him out, stops him dead from his run. Why haven't you been training? Then do you see the moment of confusion I'm talking about?
Of course, yeah.
So, again, not really a big deal in the grand scheme of things. It's just that it stops the reader. and that's the very thing you're trying to avoid. So the other boys try their best to act tough as they surround Jakob. Busy, but time for these losers. He starts to rough him up. I like this pinch, push, punch thing. It's difficult to know if it's a play fight or a fight for real. I would say play fight or real fight because this actually, you stumble over it this way, but if you go play fight or real fight, they have the symmetry that will make it easier to understand quickly.
Yeah.
Jakob, you selling. Now, the first time I read this, you selling, because I don't know who Jakob is, I thought he was wanting to buy.
All right.
Right? So,
Yeah.
which obviously on now that I know the story, and even after reading it 3 times, was like, that's absurd. But
Yes.
you got to be aware that it's not necessary. You got to make sure that those kinds of ambiguities aren't there. Otherwise, what can happen is the reader can assume that, and then as they keep reading quickly, they're going to move forward through your whole story with that assumption, right? Like it's possible to set something up at the very beginning that the reader misunderstands, and then they experience your whole story thinking that somebody was something different to what they were, right? Probably not that extreme right here, but it's those kinds of ambiguities that we need to be really careful about. Otherwise, I like the scene in general, right? So he moves closer to his face. The boy remains defiant. Get out of here. It's none of your business. His friend Ed is right beside him, tries to headbutt him. He's too obvious. Jacob easily dodges him and counterpunches him away. This is one of those things where it's like you're over-describing the blocking of it. Probably, goes in for a headbutt, but Jacob dodges.
Yeah.
Probably enough. All you need, right?
Okay.
Don't try and kiss my friend. They giggle at his expense. Or just the boys giggle is probably fine. Oh, wait, I thought you were just like your brother. That could probably be worded a little more clearly. It's clear, but there's a way to refine that to a punch, I think. This just makes the boys laugh even more at Jakob, but he maintains his focus on Martin. Again, half as many words to say that. Jakob, waste your time if you want, or train with me to become a man. I like this line of dialogue. I like what this line of my feeling is like this. The way I'm reading it is like he's this strong guy, and he wants to like save this kid on some level. So there's like a very like train with me to become a man is like a phrase that like only a certain kind of guy would get away with saying that phrase. And so I kind of like that as a character defining line of dialogue. The only thing is it's not quite right. I don't know how to refine it, but there's a way to again shrink it a little and make it punchier, I'll leave that with you, but the idea's there, so it's solid. Ed says, you mean like those men obviously your brother, whack, he hooks him, he's out cold before he hits the ground. Love that. Those within earshot ignore it. I was a little confused at this part, but a few of the boys attend to Ed on the ground. A little blood on this is fine. Blood on the concrete is a nice little image. It reinforces the violence of the thing, which is good. His face already started to slightly swell. What's wrong with you? Crouches over, slaps and shakes him. I was like, oh, okay, this is a badass dude. Cool. I like that. I think that's solid. See, he's fine, but then we're straight into something else, which is fine. I feel like there's a transition missing somehow. Anyway, Jakob peers his head around the front door to see if anyone is there. He calls out in Polish. So all of this is in Polish, right?
No. Well, everything that Jakob says is in Polish, but obviously when he gets to Scotland,
sure. But I mean, all this part, everything on these 3 pages.
Oh yeah, sorry, yeah.
Okay, yeah. So it's good because you've reinforced that nicely without getting in the way. But I did have a little bit of like, is the whole thing in Polish, or is he like, is it like one of those things where it's like you have 2 languages in the same place, and so some people throw out some Polish and some people throw out English. You know what I mean? There's
yeah.
Which it's it's obvious once we've read it twice, right?
Yes.
But it's not necessarily obvious on first read, and that's the biggest challenge that writers always need to focus on. Someone who is completely new to these pages that knows nothing about any of this, what are they going to read, you know? Anyway, with no reply, Jakob begins to take off his sweaty clothes. I think we're also over-describing all this stuff. Tomas, 14, with glasses and super curly, thick black hair. Why is that relevant?
Is it relevant? No, not really, but you're supposed to get the impression that Tomas is quite simple.
Yeah.
He's a bit of a geek, so he's quite a difference between him and Jakob. If that makes sense. Because obviously when you see the dummy fighting, you see that Tomas gets hurt because he's quite soft, he's quite weak. So that's supposed to kind of come across, but obviously that's not very clear.
Well, so what you're saying though, I feel like if you replace just a description with a description that evokes that, I mean, you do say at the end the boy is simple but good-natured. Okay. Generally, I'd want to see that rather than be told that, but I don't necessarily have a problem with this line. But then I'd probably trim this part out. You know what I mean? Like, why not just say Thomas simple but good-natured? Do you know what I mean? Like, glasses, super curly, thick hair. Like this. The problem is, here's the problem: super curly, thick black hair is such a specific visual image that in all of the pages that I've come across so far, that's probably the strongest visual image I have, aside from the blood on the concrete.
Yeah.
So I don't want a random you don't want a random description of a character
who's really not that important.
Who's not necessarily that important to be the most visual thing that sticks in my head. So a lot of this is what I always say, it's a little challenging to do this kind of feedback stuff because there are a million things I could say, right? And it all is based on context. So in some cases that could be the perfect description right there. But within the context of what you've written so far, that detail is kind of too visual in a way, right? Yeah. I'm not saying we want to avoid visual. We just want more of the visuals we need earlier.
Yes.
So that this isn't so distinct, and then probably scale this back. So it all has to be relative, you know?
Yes.
Jakob, you not hear me? Tomasz, I'm helping your mom prepare supper. Jakob continues to undress and throw some of his dirty clothes. So I get this. I get that this is a little bantery thing, but continues to undress is an odd turn of phrase for a guy taking off his gym clothes. Like it sounds like a striptease or something almost. The way the way the language is. So we got to watch out for some of those like hidden implications of the phrasing. Simplify. Jakob stares at Tomasz's top lip that has the beginnings of a very poor mustache. So I like this little bit. I like the licking the finger and smearing his face and him trying to rub it off. I didn't see it until the second read because I missed this part. Top lip that has the beginnings of a very poor mustache. So it's like, the very poor mustache is buried at the end of beginnings of, which is buried under top lip that has, which is buried under Jacob stares at, right? So it's like the image order thing, it's like you're burying the lead, you know? Like we need to see the poor mustache. In other words, like you could just say Tomasz is, scratches at his lip. He's got a very poor mustache. Jacob licks his fingers, like think about, I'm not saying that's the way you want to do it, but think about the order that we're getting these images. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Kinda?
Absolutely. Yep.
Okay, what is the shit? He's disgusted. He rubs his face. Papa 60 is the breadwinner, but not the head of the family. I like that as a description, but I probably would never tell a writer to write that because it's not something I can see, but I do get it, so I'm okay with it. Enters the hall with the dinner plate in his hand. Both stop their play fight. He holds Tomas' face. I had to look up this soccer player, by the way.
Oh, it really is such an obscure reference, and obviously with what you've pointed out, with how much time I've given Tomaj, I really think I need to cut that out because it's obscure. It really is, and I think for a lot of readers, they would be like, "Is that a character? Is that?" Yeah, I
Well,
think.
my initial thought was like, is that like a slang phrase or something, right? And
Yeah,
then I looked it up. Oh, he's a very big footy player, right? So,
yeah,
okay, and it's also I think it's from the '80s or something as
yes,
well.
yeah. So it's quite an obscure kind of reference, but yeah,
Yeah, so you might want maybe
yeah.
something. Is this a contemporary story?
Yeah, fairly contemporary. Yeah, I mean it's
Okay.
not necessarily 2018, but it's early 21st century. So like with the age that Jakob is, he'll have grown up and kind of heard stories about Boniek and all that. But again, I'm going to cut it 100% because I really do think it's too obscure.
Okay. Yeah, I mean that's kind of the it's a small thing, but those kinds of the main issue with it really is that those kinds of details add up. So
Yeah,
just on the surface of it, it's not necessarily a problem, but it really does it matters. Like all the advice I give to anybody on these sessions is like the advice is specific to this situation, right? Like you might be able to do this thing had it been set up differently or if I was feeling something different by the time I got to that point. So it's always a little challenging, right? In general, I'm going to say somebody, if it's too obscure a reference and you're going to lose 80% of your readers with the reference, you probably want something a little more generic or something a little more contemporary if it's relevant.
yeah,
Anyway, Jakob beams a large smile, shakes his face from side to side. This is very blocking. This is very like how the actors are going to move,
yeah,
which we generally it's filler from the reader's standpoint. So yes, it makes sense. Yes, it describes the scene, but as the reader, I'm busy looking for clues as to what's happening and who do I care about and why am I reading, right? So
yeah,
every time you describe somebody smiles or somebody looks away or somebody spins around or what's known as actor blocking, right? How the actors are standing. When you describe those kinds of things, particularly when they're detached from the action of the scene, then it really slows the read because the reader has to figure out why am I being presented this piece of information,
yeah.
Make sure that you don't have an apostrophe in a word like that. Let's go.
Yes, yes,
For somebody like me, my
yeah,
eyes go straight to it.
yes,
Jakob wants to dummy fight, but Tomas walks toward Papa as he rubs his neck. It's all too wordy. The logistics of it are fine, but it's too wordy. He says, "Why are you so rough?" He gathers his clothes from the door, starts to head of this line where he's I'm assuming it's this gesture, right? Like a shh kind of a thing.
yes,
So puts his finger over his lips, could be any,
yes.
right? It could be any gesture. So
Uh-huh.
you probably want to, Jakob makes a shush gesture or something,
Yes. Okay. Yeah,
He points to there. You're so busy describing the logistics of the scene
yeah,
that it got really confusing.
yeah,
It makes sense once you take the time to read it, but my point is that readers are not going to be taking the time to
yes.
read it. They're going to be reading
Absolutely.
quickly. And so then there we are. There's potentially something like who is Daro? What's the who is Jakob? What's the conflict there? Is Martin? Is it Martin? Is he going to be seduced by the dark side? Is Jakob the dark side? There are questions here. There are dramatic things in your pages that, if this really connects and resonates with a reader, could make them want to keep going. But
Yes.
what's going to really enhance it is if you really figure out what's the narrative that's pulling them through and make sure all of that stuff is serving that narrative, not the other way around.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. 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 It does. 100%.
Yeah. So, but I mean, the writing style itself, like your writing itself is it. I feel like you probably have something interesting to say here, and I feel like there probably is an interesting story here. So, this is one of those things where it's like this is what I find. This is what I if you don't mind me classifying you like this is what I would call solid intermediate level writing. And to me, the solid intermediate level writing is the most frustrating for me as a reader, producer, somebody looking for projects. It's the most frustrating for me to read because it's like you're good enough that you know not to make the obvious mistakes, but then there's this level that's missing, right? And it's like I need and want you to weave that into your work. So it's like you're solid here, but there's this other thing that the producer or production company needs more than the solidness of the writing. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Definitely.
And that's the part that we need to focus on, which, obviously we could spend hours talking about it and going into the details of the story. And, even what you said at the very beginning with going to Scotland to get his brother's dead body and all this kind of stuff I want this to set that up.
Yes.
Because that sounds interesting. And if this pulled me in, then I would absolutely get to that. And once I get to that, I can be wowed by that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Hopefully that makes sense.
It does. Thank you.
Let's see. We've got a question here from Eddie. Jeff, how many pages of story do you think is hidden under the description? What does that mean, Eddie? I'm not quite sure what that means. Did you understand that question, Kieran?
How many pages of story do you think is hidden?
Clarify for me what you mean by that. How many pages of story do you think is, quote, hidden under the description?
It might mean how much of the entire plot do you think is kind of referred to, or whether...
Should be or is in this case?
I'm not sure.
We need Eddie to answer that one. I guess I'm not sure what the question means, but so here's the thing. You should be able to look at every page. See if I can. It's always tough to figure out how to explain this. You should be able to look at this page and know here's what happens on this page. The story gets set in motion, or the thing that's going to set the story in motion, we're seeing the wheels turn to bring about that situation, right?
Yeah.
We need to see that narrative part. Whereas when we look at what's here on this page, those wheels aren't there. It's milieu, it's descriptive. So as far as what's hidden underneath the description, it's all tied together,
Yes.
Without Eddie clarifying that question, I'm not sure that I can go more into that, but maybe we'll talk about that next week if he brings it up again. Oh, here we go. Of the 3 pages you've read, could he have said the same thing in 1 or 2 pages? Okay. So, yes, probably 2 pages for what's here. Or at least, you could probably say what's here in about 2 pages, maybe 2 and a little bit. But I don't necessarily want you just to condense. I think you should condense for yourself as a writer.
I think from the feedback you're giving me, Jeff, I actually really think that I should rewrite it.
I think so too.
Because I think you're on the money of there's obviously kind of little interest and kind of crumbs, little clues, but it's not really enough for us to really know what the story's about. I actually think when I first originally wrote this, I thought him hitting Martin is a good demonstration of his anti-hero character.
Yeah.
But it has actually nothing to do with the plot. And when he goes into the room with Dara, who's his girlfriend, there's a conversation where she's like, those guys in the park said something to me earlier. I'm really worried about your trial that's coming up. And then that whole kind of conversation is interrupted by, oh, the police are at the door, or they've got terrible news from Scotland, your brother's dead. Now that's a kind of inciting incident. That's where things kind of really kick in. And you reading out these first 3 pages really shows to me that I've spent too much time window dressing Jakob to show how fit he is, that he's a boxer, that he's a bit of a badass, that he lives in this horrible place, you know. I really need to kind of get straight into the meat and nuts of it.
Yeah, there's this general sort of screenwriting advice or theory that basically says that the beginning of your story is establishing the world your character's a part of, and then the inciting incident comes along and sort of upends that world somehow and sets them on the new path, and the new path is the story that the movie is going to follow. So what happens is, thinking that way, understanding that dynamic of story, a lot of writers spend those first couple of pages doing what you've done here, which is establishing the world the character lives in prior to that inciting incident. But what you have to remember is that we still want some sort of narrative hook pulling us through all those things. I don't want you to necessarily get rid of those crumbs that you're referring to, right? I don't necessarily want you to. You could keep all of the things that you have here, but find a way to create a narrative that pulls us through that. So we have to pick up those details as we're watching this story unfold, right? It could be an initial story that leads into the story. It doesn't have to be immediately attached to the main story.
Yeah.
But
I mean, I know that you don't give examples, Jeff, but when I was reading it, I was thinking to myself, would it work if our story started after Jakob's been in court, where he's found out you're on bail, and what we can do is we can introduce a lot of the characters?
Possibly. I mean, there are really too many possibilities for me to sort of suggest one over another. But you know, you could. I mean, I'm always resistant to make this kind of to say this kind of a thing, because I don't necessarily want you to go in this direction. But if you imagine him, you know, maybe you start with him lifting weights or something in jail as the doors open, and then the lawyer's taking him out and he's back to freedom, and he crosses this guy or crosses that guy, and then, you know, he's back home and there's a reunion, right? So you're establishing that he's just gotten out for, I don't know if that's appropriate to your story, but but that journey right there is a narrative that it's going to be much more interesting to watch that narrative than to randomly see some guy exercising in the park, randomly crossing paths with some kids, randomly coming home and messing with his little nephew or whoever that is. You know what I mean? Like, it's there's nothing motivating the action right now. Yeah. Right? Whereas if he was let out of prison and we're following him home, there's something motivating that action that then we can see those little pieces. Yeah. I'm not saying that's the way you want to do it, but you're going to need to find something like that so that you're motivating the action through it. Make sense?
Yes, 100%.
Okay, cool.
Good.
All right. So do you have any other sort of questions or anything before we sort of put a pin in that for now?
No, that's me. Thank you very much. Very interesting and lots of food for thought.
Cool.
For sure.
All right. Well, thank you very much for sharing your pages, and I hope everyone else says thank you to you as well. It's always a little bit intimidating, perhaps, to put your pages out there, to have somebody, you know, pull them to pieces and pick them apart. So I really do appreciate it. Hopefully, it wasn't painful.
No, not at all. No.
Okay. We want to make sure that other people send their pages in. So tell them that it was not a good experience.
No, it was incredibly useful for sure. 100%.
Okay, good. All right.
Thank you very much.
So does it make sense to everybody else then? What some of the challenges are? I think the big thing for me, the big takeaway for me with this is that this is so common. This is very much the way, you know, dozens, hundreds of projects start from writers. I mean, I see this, the kinds of issues that we've been talking about today are common to what I would consider to be 90% of what I would consider to be intermediate level writers, of writers who've been doing this for a couple of years, probably written 2, 3, 4, 5 scripts, maybe keep sort of spinning the wheels, not quite sure, how to get around it. Those kinds of once you get, look, the formatting is easy. Learning the style of screenwriting is relatively straightforward. Once we get past that, then we get to the stuff that actually matters, which is the narrative and how we introduce the story and how we pull the reader through the story and how we're presenting those details that the audience needs to know, maybe needs to know for setup reasons, but how do we present those in a way that that we need to know what happens next? If you think of it this way, when someone's reading your script, you want them to really, really want to know what's going to happen next with every sentence. So part of that's the way you're writing and the language that you're using. Part of that's the story that you're telling. Part of that's the details of the characters. But we're always going to want to make sure that the reader is hooked and wants to keep reading, has to keep reading. And so if you're including details or you're writing sentences that are a little sort of fluffy and maybe use too many words to say something simple, you're pushing the reader away a little bit at the time when you need to be pulling them in. And that pulling them in happens through that concise language, serving a narrative that just grabs them. So to that end, let me read out the first couple of pages from the American Sniper script, because I think it does that to a large degree. So let me have a look at let me pop over and pull that up for you. Over black, the groan of tank treads drowns out the call to prayer as an entire marine company advances over the top of us. Exterior street, Fallujah, Iraq, day. The sun melts over squat residences on a narrow street. Marine company creeps toward us like a cautious Goliath. Foot soldiers walk alongside Humvees and tanks. Commanding officer off screen, radio chatter. Charlie Bravo 3, we got eyes on you from the east. Clear to proceed, over. Exterior rooftop, Overwatch, same. Sun glints off a slab of corrugated steel. Beneath it, Chris Kyle lays prone, dick in the dirt, eye to the glass of a 300 Win Mag sniper rifle. He's Texas stock with a boyish grin, blondish goatee, and vital blue eyes. Both those eyes are open as he tracks the scene below, sweating his ass off in the shade of steel. Chris Kyle, fucking hotbox. Goat, 24, Arkansas Marine, lies beside him, woodsy and outspoken, watching dirt devils swirl in the street. Goat, dirt over here tastes like dog shit. Chris Kyle, I guess you'd know. Goat balks and fixes his M4 on the rooftop door. Chris, scope POV, track across bombed out buildings, twisted metal and golden domed mosques. Ragged curtains flutter out a window. Cattails on the river sway in the same direction. We see him studying windage. We see what he's thinking. Sound effects. A low-frequency buzz escalates over picture as his concentration deepens. Crosshairs land on a man on cell phone watches the convoy from a rooftop. Chris Kyle keys mic. I got a military-aged male on a cell phone watching the convoy. Over. Commanding officer off screen. If you think he's reporting troop movement, you have a green light. Your call. Over. Goat off camera. He could be calling his old lady. Man on cell studies the convoy, his hair tossed by wind. Crosshair push left of target, compensating for windage. Sound effects. Chris takes a deep inhale, holds it, then expels. His finger is taking up trigger slack when the man dips his shoulder slightly. Chris holds off as man on cell hangs up and steps away. Chris Kyle keys mic. He stepped off. Chris sucks air. Close. The ambient world floods back in. Barked orders, diesel engines, and a woman and kid exit the same structure. They're headed up the sidewalk, but cut sharply into the street. Chris Kyle keys mic. Hold up. I've got a woman and a kid 200 yards out, moving toward the convoy. Extreme close-up. The woman cradles something beneath her robes. Chris Kyle. Her arms aren't swinging. She's carrying something. Crosshairs on woman as she pulls a cylindrical object from her robes. His vision obscured, but Chris Kyle, she just pulled a grenade. An RKG Russian grenade. I think she gave it to the kid. Commanding officer, off screen. You say a woman and a kid? Sound effects, his heartbeat. Thump, 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 thump. Chris Kyle, you got eyes on this? Can you confirm? Commanding officer, off screen. Negative. You know the ROEs. Your call. Goat, off camera. They fry you if you're wrong. Send your ass to Leavenworth. The kid moves toward the convoy with the grenade. Chris Kyle, off camera. Fuck. Mother motions the kid to hurry along. Extreme close-up. Her robes flutter. Trash blows in the street. The dust off her son's footsteps, all blowing the same direction. The kid sprints toward the Marines. In the street, young Marines wading into war, boots scuffing dirt. Close on Chris. His exhale hisses from tobacco-stained teeth. Breathe it down. He struggles to get calm, fighting for control. Sound effects. Thump, 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 thump. Crosshairs left of the running target, leading him, compensating for a dozen different considerations. As he pauses upon exhale, the world goes quiet. Landscape pulses with color and focus. He stokes the trigger and the bullet leaps from the barrel, cracks like a whip. The 300 round hurls forward, glinting as it enters the flesh of a white-tail buck. It staggers, draws, and topples to the ground. We are exterior hills, West Texas, breed on. A field shrouded in fog. Chris Kyle, 8, jumps from a deer blind, innocent and excited, running toward the buck. So, I don't know about you, but that's a hell of a suspenseful opening to me. Now, one of the things that I love about this this opening, and kind of what made me think about this to talk about in relation to Kieran's project, is, see, we're introducing all this information, right? The call to prayer, the Marine Company advancing. First of all, something active is happening, right? The company's advancing through this town. We hear the tank treads, but the tank treads are doing something active. They're drowning out the local call to prayer, which is an incredibly important moment in the day here of this local town. These guys are sort of piling over, right? The sun is melting the squat residences, right? So the sun melts over you feel the heat because of the way it's described. The Marine Company creeps toward us like a cautious Goliath. It's this massive thing coming. All these foot soldiers are with Humvees and tanks. We hear the radio chatter. Then you see this guy. He's sitting there. He's face down, looking through the scope of his rifle. He's hot. It's all disgusting. You know, the dirt tastes like dog shit. Like, it's painting this textural picture of this place through this very active scene that's happening, which is this troop rolling through this town, right? And we know Fallujah, Iraq, was a war area, so we have a certain context for it built into what's going on here. You have this sound effect thing. Be careful using this technique, but it was certainly an interesting technique for here that's used to good effect, where the sound effects really cause this sort of moment of pause and this moment of tension. We see the guy on the cell phone. We're seeing the details through the action that's happening, and as that action is happening, we see it go one way. Oh, we think it's the terrorists gonna blow up the Marine Company or the local, keeping them away. But then it turns out, oh, maybe he's just calling his old lady. Then he leaves. So we have the build up and then the letdown, the ease of tension, right? But then you see the kid and you see the woman, and did she actually give she gave the cylindrical object, but what is that? Is that actually a grenade? Now this guy, or this main character, has to make this choice in this moment, and we know what you fry if you're wrong, because you just killed a kid, right? So he's put in this situation, and that's the job, and it's the tension that's being built up here. It's incredibly powerful. And then we see him stoke the trigger, and then we see a bullet going, and then that becomes our transition to when he was 8 and he shot a Shutterbuck obviously hunting with, I think the scene is with his dad. I can't remember where it goes from here, but it's a great way to introduce the characters, a great way to introduce the tension of the situation. It ultimately turns out to be an even bigger part of the story. But the reason that I wanted to sort of call attention to it is that you're introducing the place in the context of the you're introducing the place in the context of the narrative action of the scene. Fernando asks, what's the difference between OS and OC? OS is off screen, so it's someone who's not in the physical space that we're in. So someone on the other side of a door, or on camera, or something, like a TV set, or someone in another room, but we can hear their voice within this room. Off camera is simply we're not looking at this person, but they're within the same physical space. Generally speaking, I'm gonna suggest avoiding OC, because it's a very directory sort of convention. But that's what those mean. So does that make sense? Fascinating first 3 pages from that script, don't you think? So the point here is not really to compare the two, because they're totally apples and oranges. The two scripts are very, very different. I think the point that I want everyone to take away from it is that when you're introducing a scene or a situation, or when you find yourself, as you will, because every screenwriter does it, this is absolutely not on any one writer. Everyone does it. Where you over-describe a scene, where you give us details or logistics that you think are poetic, or that you think are important or relevant, but they're really kind of not necessary to the narrative action that's happening. Every detail should serve the suspense of what's going on, or help us understand what's at stake here, or who's who and what's happening and why we care, right? So if every detail serves that, we're going to we the reader are going to focus on every detail. If we read some stuff and we see, oh, this is really just window dressing, or oh, this is really just logistics, or oh, this is kind of too many words to describe something. What happens is, it's nothing personal. It's just you instinctively, intuitively begin to understand that I don't need to read every word. Not every word is crucial, and so you just naturally start skipping or skimming certain words, and then you end up, as the reader, missing some important details, or it didn't really work for me. Maybe reader can't pinpoint why it didn't work for them, but that's why, because they weren't as finely focused on the detail, because somewhere along the way you kind of demonstrated that the detail hasn't been as finely refined by you as it needs to be. So I think that's the takeaway from today, hopefully. I've seen in other scripts people end phrases in parentheses when there is an interruption. So you wouldn't want to, if there's an interruption, you don't want to end a sentence with a parentheses. You're going to want to end it with a double hyphen, which they did a lot in the American Sniper pages. Because when you have a double hyphen, like a half a sentence or a word, and then there's a double hyphen, that is the convention for the next thing interrupts that thing. So you can do it in dialogue. Somebody says, hey, what are you? And then double hyphen. And then the next line of dialogue, get out of my store, or whatever, right? So you know that next line interrupts. But you can also do it with action. Hey, what are you? The car smashes through the window. So you can have the action interrupt the dialogue. Or you can have the car smashes through and then the character says something. What are you doing in my store? Like, you could have the character interrupt the action description. Kay says, what's wrong with the apostrophe? Oh, when I was pointing out the apostrophe in let's. Let's, L-E-T apostrophe S, is a contraction for let us. So let's go is let us go, right? Let us go to the store. Let's go. But if you say someone is holding something and he lets go, it's not let us go. He lets go. So there's no apostrophe in that. And that's what was in Kieran's script. Fernando says, can you talk more about the blocking aspect of a sentence in a screenplay? I think is related to the concept of image order. You said it on the review of Hodgman's screenplay, but I missed it. So I'm not sure what you're referring to, Fernando, exactly, but blocking. So I guess my general suggestion is don't block the actor. So actor blocking, it's a theater term, and it basically means where the actor is going to stand on the stage. We call that blocking. So if a character is going to enter the stage and slap the other actor, we need to make sure that both actors are in position to make the slap look realistic, right? So if the one actor's over here and the other actor's over there and he slaps and it clearly doesn't slap him, then it's not going to be believable to the audience. So we have to do what's called blocking. So we do actor blocking and we do camera blocking. So if we're shooting something, we make sure that the camera's going to end up here so that it gets this angle of this action, right? So a lot of times writers will write angle on, or camera swoops around, or this kind of thing. We don't want to do that in a reading script. Whenever you're writing a speculative screenplay, you're writing a script to be read. It's not a script to be shot just yet, which is called a shooting script. You're writing a reading script, and because you're writing a reading script, we don't want to include the camera blocking. But when you have in some scenes, you'll have, the character enters and then, he turns away and then says this, or she walks across the room and looks out the window and then she says this. That is actor blocking, really. It's describing what the actor's movements are. The only time you're going to want to do that is if it serves the narrative. She's walking to the window to see the getaway car pull away from the bank, or whatever it might be, right? She walks over to the window and notices her neighbor, a guy running out of her neighbor's apartment because you were having an affair with that guy, whatever it might be, right? So, but you don't want to have just description of which way the actor turns, or, the actor blinks his eyes, or looks at him stoically, or little things that are telling the actor how to do what the actor's doing. What we want to do is make sure that every line of action description is sharp and succinct and pushing our narrative forward, right? So it's not it's not just the sort of simple logistics of what's happening, because you see the picture when you're writing this stuff. You see it very clear in your head. You see he moves over there and then she spins around and then they, whatever. But that, how you see it, is not really relevant to the reader. The director is ultimately going to decide. He may want to position it somewhere else entirely, shoot it entirely over their shoulders where they're looking in one direction. Or my point is, it's not for you to decide as the writer what the actual blocking is. See that scene clearly and describe the narrative action of it, but don't tell the director how to direct it. Don't tell the actors how to act it. Tell us what we need to do to understand what's going on and to be drawn into and pulled through the story. For those who are watching a video of this later, or an edited episode of this, only slightly edited probably, if you go to thefeedbackloop.co, you can register for the next live session. These are held on Tuesdays at 3 p.m. If you have pages that you want to submit, please submit those at thefeedbackloop.co/submit. Has instructions on how to submit your pages. We're nearly finished with season 1 of this, and we're going to start gathering and assembling pages to do a season 2 coming up shortly. So head on over to thefeedbackloop.co and sign up for this, because we'd love to have you here. It's a lot of fun to get your work. I don't know if it's a lot of fun, but it'll be good and helpful for you to get your work sent through the mill here. So hopefully you get a lot out of it. I thank you so much for watching. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Thanks again to Kieran